Right. So, you're still up. It's late, you've got the blue light dimming your screen. Maybe you've got headphones in, so you don't wake anyone, and you're looking for something to fill the quiet with. Something interesting enough to hold your attention, just long enough that your brain stops running laps around whatever it's been circling all day, but not so loud or jarring that it snaps you awake. That's what we're here for. Tonight we're going to talk about Rapture, a city at the bottom of the ocean, a city built on the idea that the best and the brightest shouldn't have to answer to anyone. A city that, and I cannot stress this enough, did not go well. Let's start with the man, Andrew Ryan, not his birth name actually. Born Andrei Ryanovsky in the Russian Empire, 1911. He watched the Bolsheviks take everything from his family when he was a boy, watched the state swallow the individual whole. That kind of thing leaves a mark. It leaves a scar you carry around for the rest of your life, and sometimes that scar becomes an ideology. Sometimes it becomes an entire city at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. People respond to trauma in different ways. Ryan made his way to America, made his fortune in steel and oil and whatever else rich industrialists get their hands into, and he did well. He did very well. But he watched the world with growing unease. He saw governments taxing the productive to support the unproductive. He saw regulations strangling innovation. He saw what he considered the slow, creeping hand of collectivism reaching into every corner of American life. And he thought, no, that's not going to happen to me. Not again, never again. So he hatched a plan, a rather ambitious plan, if we're being honest. He would build a city, underwater, completely independent of any government, any regulation, any taxation. A place where the artist could create without censorship, where the scientist could experiment without oversight, where the businessman could profit without the state taking its cut. A utopia of the self. Objectivism made manifest. Glass and steel and neon, glowing on the ocean floor like a fist shaken at the entire surface world. It was, in its way, beautiful. The idea of it, the sheer audacity. Construction began in the late 1940s. Ryan had the money, the connections, and the stubbornness required to bend reality to his will. Massive bathysphere networks connected district to district. Gigantic geothermal vents on the ocean floor were harnessed to power the whole enterprise. Horticultural centres grew the food. Laboratories pushed the boundaries of science. Artists and architects designed structures that would have been impossible on the surface. Because down there, with the pressure and the darkness pressing in from every side, you could do things with glass and light that would make a cathedral jealous. Rapture opened its doors, well, its airlocks, in 1946, and the best and the brightest came. Scientists, artists, engineers, entrepreneurs, people who were tired of being told to share, people who believed, like Ryan did, that a man's talent was his own and nobody else's. For a while, it worked. For a little while. For a little while, Rapture was everything Ryan promised it would be. A city where the only ceiling was ambition itself. Now, here's where things get interesting. Here's where things always get interesting, in these utopian stories, because the flaw is never in the blueprint. The flaw is in the people. And in Rapture, the flaw came in the form of a substance called Adam. Adam was discovered by a scientist named Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum. And honestly, discovered is a generous word for it. She found it in sea slugs. Little sea slugs that, when bonded with a human host, could produce a substance that rewrote genetic code on the fly. That's Adam. Genetic putty. You could splice it into yourself and gain abilities that should not exist. Telekinesis, pyrokinesis, the ability to shoot bees from your hands. Yes, bees, plasmids they were called, little injectable miracles, little bottled impossibilities. And people wanted them. Of course they wanted them. You're living in a city built on the philosophy that you should be able to do whatever you want, be whatever you want, take whatever you want, and someone offers you a syringe that lets you set things on fire with your mind. What do you think is going to happen? What happened was addiction. What happened was a black market. What happened was the entire social fabric of Rapture beginning to fray at the seams, because Adam didn't just give you powers, it changed you, physically, mentally. The more you used, the more you needed, and the more you needed, the less you resembled the person you used to be. Splicers, they were called. People so far gone on Adam that their bodies were twisted, their minds shattered, wandering the corridors of Rapture like ghosts in a haunted house that they themselves had helped to wreck. But Adam was in demand, and where there's demand, there's supply, and where there's supply, there's profit, and where there's profit, well, that's where Frank Fontaine comes in. Frank Fontaine. If Andrew Ryan was the architect of Rapture, Fontaine was the termites in its walls, a con man, a smuggler, a gangster with a gift for telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. He saw the Adam market, and he saw dollar signs, or whatever currency they used down there, and he moved in fast. He set up businesses, ran smuggling operations, bringing in surface world goods that Ryan had banned, and positioned himself as the voice of the common man in a city that didn't believe in common men. Fontaine was charming. Fontaine was dangerous. Fontaine was everything Ryan's philosophy said should rise to the top, and that drove Ryan absolutely boah. Because Fontaine was succeeding not through innovation or excellence, but through exploitation, through manipulation, through the very worst parts of human nature that Ryan's system was supposed to elevate beyond. The problem with a philosophy that says everyone should be free to pursue their own self-interest is that some people's self-interest involves taking advantage of everyone else. Funny how that works. Funny and terrible. Fontaine needed more Adam, though. The demand was growing faster than sea slugs could produce it. And then he found the answer. Or rather, he made the answer. Children. Little girls specifically. The sea slugs could be implanted in a young host, and the host would produce Adam at an incredible rate. So Fontaine began collecting orphans, buying them, taking them. He called them his little sisters. A name so saccharitically sweet it practically rots your teeth. Little girls carrying giant needles, wandering the ruined halls of Rapture, extracting Adam from the dead. That's the image. Hold on to that one. Little girls with glowing eyes, talking to corpses like they're friends. It's exactly as unsettling as it sounds. Now, the little sisters were valuable, enormously valuable. So they needed protection, and that's where the big daddies come in. Big daddies. Imagine a person sealed inside a diving suit, fused with it at the biological level, their humanity systematically stripped away and replaced with a single, overwhelming imperative. Protect the little sister. That's it. That's their whole purpose. They stomp through the corridors of Rapture, these hulking, groaning, diving bell brass monstrosities, and they will absolutely destroy anything that gets between them and their charge. They're loyal, they're relentless, they're tragic. They were people once, volunteers even, in the early days. People who signed up for what they thought was a science project and ended up as something less than human and more than machine. Somewhere in between, somewhere awful, a big daddy will protect its little sister until it dies, and then another big daddy will take over. That's the system. That's the economy. That's what Rapture's great experiment produced when you followed the logic all the way down. Meanwhile, Ryan and Fontaine were heading toward a collision, a big one. Ryan saw Fontaine as a cancer on his city, a parasite feeding off the very freedoms Rapture was supposed to celebrate. Fontaine saw Ryan as a hypocrite, a man who preached self-determination but couldn't handle it when someone else succeeded by any means necessary. They were both right, in a way. They were both completely, catastrophically right, and neither of them was willing to blink. Fontaine faked his own death. That's the move. He staged the whole thing, vanished from public life, and re-emerged as a man named Atlas. Atlas. A different name, a different persona, a different accent. Atlas was a populist, a revolutionary. He spoke for the workers, the ordinary people of Rapture, who had been left behind by Ryan's meritocracy. He was the anti-Ryan, the people's champion, and he was, of course, Frank Fontaine the entire time, running the same con on a grander scale. Atlas began stoking unrest. He had built an army of splicers, followers, people who were angry and desperate and looking for someone to blame. The city was already falling apart by this point. The Adam epidemic was out of control. People were mutating into monsters. Whole districts were abandoned, flooded, dark. The promise of Rapture had curdled into something nightmarish, and into this chaos, Atlas poured gasoline and struck a match. Civil war. The Rapture Civil War. It was brutal, it was swift, and it was devastating. Ryan, feeling his city slipping away from him, did what powerful men do when they're losing control. He got paranoid. He got authoritarian. He seized businesses. He nationalized industries. He did all the things he'd built Rapture to escape from, because when the walls are closing in, ideology goes out the window and survival takes over. Ryan became the very thing he despised. That's the tragedy. That's the big, obvious, sitting right there on the table tragedy. The man who built a city to escape the boot of the state ended up wearing the boot himself. And then there were the security systems, automated turrets, security cameras, flying drones. Ryan turned Rapture into a surveillance state because of course he did. Because when your utopia is on fire, you don't question the design. You build more fire extinguishers. You point them at everyone. Rapture was falling, and fast. Now we get to the part you might actually know if you've played the games. BioShock 1, the first one. The one that changed what people thought a shooter could be. It begins with a plane crash. A man, you don't know his name yet, plunges into the Atlantic Ocean in 1960. There's fire on the water, wreckage everywhere, and the only thing still standing is a lighthouse. A tall, solitary lighthouse on a small island. You swim to it, you climb inside, and there's a bathysphere waiting for you, with a voice on the radio and a city glowing far below. You descend into Rapture, the man, the player character. His name is Jack, and from the moment he arrives, he's being guided, directed, told where to go and what to do by a man on the radio who calls himself Atlas. Atlas is friendly, Atlas is helpful. Atlas has a family trapped somewhere in the city, and he needs Jack's help to find them. "Would you kindly help me?" Atlas says. "Would you kindly do this? Would you kindly go there? Would you kindly?" It's such a polite phrase, such a gentle, courteous, almost old-fashioned way of asking for something. And Jack does everything Atlas asks. Of course he does. He's a good person. He's trying to help. He fights through splicers, navigates the ruins of Rapture, meets the ghosts of what this city used to be, audio diaries scattered everywhere, little recorded moments from people who lived and died down here, telling their stories in fragments. It's haunting. It's beautifully, terribly haunting. Along the way, Jack encounters the Little Sisters. They're there doing their work, and the player has a choice. You can harvest the Adam from the Little Sister, killing her in the process, or you can rescue her, removing the slug and letting her live, but getting less Adam in return. It's a moral test embedded in the mechanics of the game. Do you take the efficient, selfish path, or do you sacrifice power for compassion? That's the question BioShock asks you, and it asks it over and over again with every little sister you meet. And the big daddies are always there, always standing guard. You have to fight them to get to the little sisters. And those fights are not easy. They're loud, they're desperate. And even though these things aren't human anymore, there's something deeply sad about it. Something that makes you feel like you're doing something wrong, even when you're doing what the game wants you to do. Jack pushes deeper into Rapture. He meets Tenenbaum, the scientist who created the Little Sister program, and who now, stricken with guilt, wants to undo what she's done. He meets Sander Cohen, a deranged artist who has turned the remains of Fort Frolic into his personal gallery of horrors. He meets Andrew Ryan, and that meeting, that confrontation, is the moment BioShock becomes something more than a really good shooter. Ryan has figured out what's going on. He knows Atlas is Fontaine. He knows Jack has been manipulated. And he delivers a speech en Pontier. A monologue, really, about choice, about free will, about the illusion of agency. And then he gives Jack an order. Not a request, an order. A man chooses, a slave obeys, and he hands Jack a golf club and tells him to kill him. Jack does. Not because he wants to, because he can't help it. Because every time Atlas said, "Would you kindly," he wasn't asking. He was commanding. Those two words, "would you kindly," were a trigger phrase, a hypnotic suggestion implanted in Jack's mind before he ever arrived in Rapture. Every choice Jack thought he was making, every decision he thought was his own, was actually Atlas pulling strings, was actually Fontaine pulling strings. Jack was never free. Jack was never in control. He was a puppet who thought he had hands. That's the twist. That's BioShock's big gut punch, sit there and stare at the screen twist. The player, who has been following objectives and waypoints and mission markers the whole game, is confronted with the fact that they were being controlled too. That the "would you kindly" wasn't just a mind control phrase for Jack. It was a metaphor for every video game objective you've ever followed without questioning why. Would you kindly go to this location? Would you kindly kill this person? Would you kindly press the button? You did it, every time. Because the game told you to. It's clever. It's really, really clever. And it hits different at 2 a.m, I'll tell you that. Jack survives the encounter with Ryan, barely, and goes after Fontaine for real this time. Fontaine has pumped himself full of Adam, transforming into something enormous and monstrous and barely human. The final battle is messy and loud, and exactly as desperate as it should be. And depending on how you played, depending on whether you harvested those little sisters or rescued them, you get one of 3 endings. If you rescued them all, the good ending. Jack takes the little sisters to the surface. They grow up, they live normal lives. Jack gets old, surrounded by the girls he saved, and they're there when he passes. It's quiet, it's gentle, it's earned. If you harvested them, the bad ending. Jack takes Rapture's nuclear self-destruct device and brings it to the surface. He becomes a monster. He becomes Fontaine. The cycle continues. And then there's the secret ending, the one where you did a mix. But let's not overcomplicate things. The point is this: your choices mattered. Not in the way games usually pretend they matter, with a dialogue wheel and some different dialogue. In a way that sat with you. In a way that made you think about what kind of person you were in the dark, when nobody was watching. Well, when almost nobody was watching. Now, Rapture's story doesn't end there, and if you're still awake, and I hope you are, but gently, let's talk about BioShock 2, the second game, the one that came out in 2010 and didn't get quite the same thunderous reception as the first, but told a story that in some ways cuts even deeper. BioShock 2 takes place 8 years after the events of the first game. Rapture is still down there, still flooded, still overrun with splicers, still a nightmare, but it's a quieter nightmare now. The wars are over. The power struggles have settled into something like stagnation. And into this ruin, the game introduces 2 new figures who are, in their own way, even more complicated than Ryan and Fontaine. The first is Subject Delta. That's you. That's the player character this time. You are a big daddy. Not just any big daddy. You were the first. The prototype, bonded to a little sister named Eleanor. You walked the halls of Rapture with her, protected her, were everything a big daddy was supposed to be. And then something went wrong. Eleanor's mother, and we'll get to her, separated the 2 of you. You were forced to shoot yourself, and you died, except you didn't stay dead. 10 years later, you wake up. Something has reactivated you. Something has pulled you back from wherever big daddies go when they're done. And the first thing you feel, the first thing you know, down in whatever passes for your soul inside that metal shell, is that you need to find Eleanor. That bond, that connection, it's still there. It's the only thing that's still there. Subject Delta doesn't speak, not really. You get groans, mechanical sounds, the heavy breathing of a diving suit. But you feel. That's the genius of BioShock 2. You're playing as something that most people would call a monster, and yet the emotional core of the entire game is a father trying to get back to his daughter. Eleanor Lamb, the little sister you were bonded to. She's grown up now. Well, she's a teenager, kept in a state of forced adolescence by Adam, and she's been raised by her mother, Sophia Lamb. Eleanor is brilliant, powerful, and deeply aware of what Rapture is and what it's done to the people inside it. She's been watching, learning, waiting, and she's been communicating with you, Delta, through the little sisters, through their shared bond. She needs you. And you need her. It's the most unlikely parent-child story ever told. And somehow it works. Somehow it works beautifully. Now. Sophia Lamb, Andrew Ryan's philosophical opposite. Where Ryan believed in the supremacy of the individual, Lamb believed in the supremacy of the collective. She was a psychiatrist, a social engineer, a true believer in the idea that the self is an illusion, and that true happiness can only be found through service to the group. She came to Rapture not to celebrate individualism, but to dismantle it. She was, in Ryan's eyes, the enemy, the worst possible person to let into his city. He was probably right about that, at least. Lamb built a following, a cult, really. She called them the Rapture family, and the name was deliberate because Sophia Lamb understood something that Andrew Ryan never did. People want to belong. People want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Rapture's great sin wasn't selfishness. It was loneliness. It was a city full of people who had been told they didn't need anyone, discovering that they desperately, achingly did. Lamb offered them a family. She offered them purpose. She offered them the surrender of the self. And in Rapture's darkest days, that sounded pretty good. But the Rapture family wasn't a family. It was a control structure. Lamb didn't want to free people from the tyranny of the self. She wanted to replace that self with her own vision. She was a collectivist dictator, just as Ryan was an individualist one. Two sides of the same authoritarian coin, stamped with different philosophies, but identical in practice. The city couldn't escape it. Rapture was built on extremes, and extremes always collapse into tyranny. Always. Lamb's great project was Eleanor, her daughter. She saw Eleanor as the vessel for her ideals, a perfect mind, shaped from childhood, capable of carrying Lamb's philosophy forward. She didn't want Eleanor to be an individual. She wanted Eleanor to be a monument, a living, breathing testament to the idea that the self could be transcended, could be sacrificed, could be poured into something greater. It's chilling. It's a particular kind of parental horror that doesn't need splicers or plasmids to be terrifying. But Eleanor had other ideas, because Eleanor had you. She had Delta. She had the memory of being protected, being valued, being loved, not as an idea, not as a project, but as a person. And that memory burned in her even after Delta was taken away, even after years of her mother's philosophy, even after everything. The game follows Delta as he fights his way through what's left of Rapture, trying to reach Eleanor, trying to break through the layers of security and ideology and cult indoctrination that Sophia Lamb has wrapped around her daughter. Along the way, you make choices again. More little sisters, more moral decisions. Do you harvest or do you save? But BioShock 2 adds another layer. Some of the characters you encounter, Lamb's followers, you can choose to deal with them mercifully or not. Each choice ripples outward, shapes Eleanor's perception, shapes the kind of person she becomes. Because she's watching. Eleanor is always watching, through the eyes of little sisters, through security cameras, through whatever connection still links her to Delta. She sees what you do, she learns from it, she models herself on it. You are teaching her, whether you mean to or not, what it means to be a person, what it means to choose. The climax brings you face to face with Sophia Lamb, and she has Eleanor in her grasp, ready to complete her great work, to drain Eleanor's consciousness entirely, to merge it with the collective, to make her into the perfect vessel. And Delta, the silent, groaning, metal-plated monster that he is, fights for his daughter. Not because anyone told him to, not because a trigger phrase compelled him, because that's what you do. That's what a parent does. The endings of BioShock 2 mirror the first game's moral architecture, but hit differently. If you played mercifully, if you saved the little sisters, if you showed compassion, even in a world that had none to spare, Eleanor absorbs your memories after Delta's sacrifice, and she carries them to the surface. She becomes a person shaped by kindness, shaped by the example of a father who chose to be more than his programming. She takes Delta's essence with her, and she uses it to do good. It's hopeful, it's earned. It's the kind of ending that makes the quiet of 3 a.m. feel less lonely. If you harvested, if you were cruel, if you took what you wanted, Eleanor absorbs that instead. She becomes something hard, something ruthless. She becomes, in a way, the next iteration of everything that was wrong with Rapture. The cycle continues, the pattern repeats, the darkness propagates, and there's a middle path too. There's always a middle path. But the point, as with the first game, is the same. Your choices mattered. Not because the game told you they did, but because you felt them. Because somewhere in the act of choosing, harvest or save, cruelty or mercy, you learned something about yourself. That's what the best stories do. They hold up a mirror and let you see what's looking back. Rapture, as a place, is extraordinary. It's one of the great fictional settings in gaming. The Art Deco architecture, the leaking corridors, the flickering neon, the constant pressure of the ocean pressing in from all sides. It's suffocating and beautiful at the same time. Every room tells a story. Every audio diary is a small tragedy. You can walk through a department store that's been converted into a medical pavilion, see the remains of a New Year's Eve party frozen in time, find a dentist's office where something terrible happened and will never be explained. Rapture is haunted, not by ghosts exactly, but by the ghosts of what could have been, by the ghosts of people who believed in something and watched it rot. That's the real horror of BioShock, when you get right down to it. It's not the splicers, it's not the jump scares, it's the idea that a beautiful dream, pursued without compromise, without empathy, without the willingness to acknowledge that people are messy and complicated and sometimes weak, that kind of dream will eat itself. Every time. Without exception. Andrew Ryan built Rapture because he believed in the individual above all else. Sophia Lamb tried to save it because she believed in the collective above all else. And both of them failed. Both of them destroyed what they were trying to protect. Because the answer, as it usually is, was somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the messy, unglamorous, boring middle of caring about yourself and caring about other people at the same time. Not as an ideology, just as a practice, just as a way of being. The ocean is patient. The ocean doesn't care about your philosophy. The ocean presses in and in and in, and eventually everything that isn't strong enough or flexible enough gives way. Rapture gave way. Rapture is still down there, if the stories are to be believed. A tomb, a monument, a cautionary tale wrapped in Art Deco and glowing jellyfish. And somewhere in that ruin, if you chose well, a girl named Eleanor made it to the surface, made it to the light, carried the memory of a father who chose love over programming, compassion over efficiency, mercy over power. And that's the note BioShock wants to end on, when it's at its best. Not horror, not cynicism, hope, fragile, stubborn, deeply improbable hope, which honestly is not a bad thing to fall asleep thinking about. The idea that even in the most broken, ruined, hopeless place imaginable, someone chose to be kind, someone chose to save rather than harvest, someone chose to be more than what they were made to be. The city sleeps at the bottom of the ocean. You can sleep too now if you'd like. You've earned it. The story will be here tomorrow if you want to visit it again. There's no rush, there's no timer, no trigger phrase, no kindly. Just you and the quiet and the gentle, persistent hum of a world that's still, against all odds, turning. Close your eyes. Let the ocean carry you. Let the dark be soft and warm instead of deep and cold. Rapture is far below, and you are far above, and everything is exactly as it should be. Good night, sleep well, And if you dream of diving bells and neon light, don't worry, they can't hurt you. Not anymore, not anymore.